Today we see that there are three, sometimes called major religions. In some ways they are three versions of the same story. They are the Abrahamic traditions. They all see Abraham as their father. Sometimes when I say that to Christians, that Islam is actually a retelling of Christianity and Christianity is a retelling of Judaism, it becomes confusing for them. But that is actually the fact. Sometimes Christians today don't even recognize that Jesus and Mary are described many, many times in the Quran because they have, they think that these traditions are so distinct. But in actuality, they are retellings of the same tradition. And that singular tradition has its origin in Kemet. That is such a controversial concept. But the simplest way to identify this reality is to simply go to an old cemetery. And if you go to an old cemetery, you will actually be able to see that there are more symbols that come from ancient Africa in a Christian cemetery, in a Jewish cemetery, in a Muslim cemetery, than there are from the areas that they would like to call their home. And that Kemet actually finds its way very clearly into these traditions. Old cemeteries are often nearly a forest of obelisks, that statue that we call the Tekken. They're everywhere. We see the tombstone. The tombstone clearly comes from what historians today call the stelae. They were very similar, these slabs that often had rounded tops that described the person who was entombed. We see that people are being actually embalmed, or that they've had some sort of preparation. Those preparation practices seem to have come directly from Kemet as well. So in actuality, almost all of what I like to call mortuary culture has its origin in ancient Africa. Yet it is the African that knows the least of that story.
The two sisters, Mary and Martha, who came to the tomb where Jesus had lain. Jesus had already arisen, so all they could do was look up into the heavens. They had nothing to do. But the original story that's told by our ancestors on the temple walls of Kemet to this day, it shows that the two sisters who were known in our legacy as the Meri sisters. Mer means love. Meri means twice beloved. So these two sisters, Ast and her sister Nebuchadnezzar, called Isis and Nephthys, they not only put the broken body of their brother and husband Asa together, they even restored his organ of regeneration, which was thrown into the river and was swallowed by a fish. They put the body of Asa together. Nebuchadnezzar went to the head of Asa as they laid him out on the lion couch, where they put all the sahu, what they call mummies. His wife, Ust, she was at his feet. Nebuchadnezzar, who is the principle, who functions with the principle of air and breathing, she began to fan Asa with her wings. The concept of angels with wings come from our ancestors. You can see it on the temple walls to this day. And Asa came to life. And with his organ, which was attached to his, not down there, but to his navel, Ast transformed herself into a female falcon and flew over the erect organ and took the seed of her husband to give birth later to Heru, the holy child.
When we think of philosophy, we go to the Greeks. We start with Greeks. How can we start with Greeks when 400 BCE, they didn't even have a real society yet? 400 BCE, Kemet had already went through 29 so-called dynasties. 4,000 years of existence. And you start with the Greeks? You see what I'm saying? So this is the stolen legacy. We're going to take somebody else's stuff, retranslate it using our paradigm. And that's why studying Egyptology today is so difficult, because somebody outside of your culture is defining your culture. That's extremely dangerous number one. Number two, it cannot be truthful by its very nature, because you're even outside of the paradigm you're trying to explain. So therefore, you're going to explain my paradigm through your paradigm. And so that's what Egyptology does.
Some people look at African history or Kemetian history as part of stolen legacy. It's an idea that the civilization of Kemet, of Nubia, one can't really divide the two, but that civilization had nothing to do with African people, even though it's in Africa. And even though the people there were obviously African. This idea is propounded on an idea that the African had no place in history except as a slave. This idea was purported in the 18th and 19th century by European colonialism and imperialism to separate African people from a history and to therefore claim that we were not human. If that can be separated from the African personality, then you can provide a justification for colonialism and imperialism.
There's no Judaic thought concept before Akhenaten. After Akhenaten, in fact, there's a book called Moses and Monotheism by Sigmund Freud, and he kind of touches upon this, that either Akhenaten was symbolic of Moses, or one of Akhenaten's priests was Moses. Okay, the fictitious story coming, was Moses. Because that foundation of what Akhenaten was doing, there should be no other image before me, all of that. That's what we see in the Hebrew doctrine. And the way it is set up is pretty much the way Akhenaten set up. The only thing about it, his religion was totally of peace. But I want to say this about Akhenaten. He had to be a magnificent orator, number one. Number two, he had to be an extremely charismatic leader, because he literally got hundreds of thousands of people to follow him out into the middle of the desert and start all over again, a whole new city, and then build it with excellence. So if you can go to Egypt today, people who look like me are in a minority. The Arabs and Asiatics, the Arab Asiatic, is the dominant. He's migrated there, just like Europeans migrated to America. And what they did is they erased our history.
Right now in Kemet, they have mosques built inside of our temples. And when we visit those temples, they tell us you cannot even chant. You cannot do your ritual forms of praise to the divine. In other words, a people who tell you that Allah is the greatest will deny you the right to worship the Most High in your own land. The government of that land has not told their people that you are not of the original stock. They know nothing about how they got there. A lot of them think that they're the ones. When I went to Cairo, I'm walking down the street with my aunt. Several Egyptians come. What's that are you carrying? You don't know what this is? Oh, that's the key of life. I said, is that all? They have not a clue of what they're sitting on. As a matter of fact, they should not even be there. Why? Because it's against their religion to be around what they call images and idols. These so-called idols and images are what our ancestors painted of themselves. There were no Polaroid cameras then, okay? There was no Rolex then. So our ancestors chiseled their images in stone.
There is a bust of a personage called Nefertiti, or is claimed to be Nefertiti. It is claimed that this is a bust that represents the wife of Akhenaten, and that it dates several thousands of years old. Upon examination, it does not appear to do any of those things or to be that which it purports to be. It really is in fact a German creation from 1912 during the Second Reich. During the Second Reich, the Germans were coming about with a philosophy to justify further expansion, colonialism and imperialism. And they were essentially trying to compete against Northern Europeans such as the British and the French. And in an attempt to do that, they claimed to be the discoverers of many sets of different artifacts, one of them being this head. But in fact, what it was something created at the time or just afterwards to justify their ideas of colonialism and imperialism. The bust was actually taken up by people like Adolf Hitler in 1930, and he used it to justify the idea of Aryan supremacy, you know, the March of the Great Titans, the idea that this is an image of the people who lived in Kemet. These are the rulers of Kemet. They looked like this bust of Nefertiti. In other words, they were, inverted commas, Aryan, white, Nordic people, just like this image. This was to conjure an idea that Europeans, or people of European extraction, are the formative members of the human personality and always have been. So they claim, in fact, that all the civilizations around the Mediterranean, even those far away from the Mediterranean, are the result of European people.
The culture of the Nile was a spiritual culture based upon living in harmony with nature. We called the divine Nper, or some say Netcher, some say Netter, but the three consonants that make up the word in the Medu-Neter, in the so-called hieroglyphic language, was N-T-R, which are the consonants of the word nature. So we see the fruit doesn't fall too far from the tree. There are many expressions and aspects of Ntera, known as the Neteru. It's similar to how in the Christian faith you have God and then you have the angels. Well, in our legacy, you have the Ntera, or Neter, or Netcher, and you have the Neteru, which are the expressions of this divine principle. When we speak of the one, we also must recognize the allness of divinity, as much as we recognize the oneness of divinity.
The Medu-Neter is the divine expression in words and in writing of the Kemetic culture. You see, language is expressing a culture. A culture is how you're connected to your environment, to nature. The reason why there's more bird symbols and more plant symbols and stuff in there, because Medu-Neter is one of the only languages that we have in existence today that explains nature. The soot plant, divine, that which comes from the south. It can be eaten, it could be woven into cloth, it could be used as fabric, you can use it to build with, you can bake rope, you know. So this one plant became divine. It was a symbol of the south from which we came. Haru, the great falcon. The language uses nature. I tell people, they say, well, Mfudisi, why didn't they just use, how come the king wasn't the great lion? Why is he the great falcon? I said, let's put things in its proper perspective. The falcon, the pelican falcon we see in ancient Kemet, is the fastest creature on the planet Earth. The falcon can travel 285 miles per hour. Jet pilots and stuff are trying to imitate a falcon. He has the keenest eyesight of any creature on the planet. He can see 2 to 3 miles in advance. He can spot a mouse under a leaf while he's hovering a mile in the sky. He can go underwater 20 meters and catch a fish with his tylons. And when he comes out of the water, he's dry. Aerodynamics. He's dry. So you can't hide. You can't outrun him. You can't even jump in the water and try to get away from him. So now you see this reference, our connection with nature. But if you don't know nothing about nature, you just go, oh, that's just another bird, man. You know, in fact, I wonder how he tastes. You see, that's how backwards we have become. We're so disconnected from nature.
Unfortunately, the Egyptologists refer to these principles of gods and goddesses. We're not having that, because we never knew that word until strangers brought it to us. And to posit a deity that's all male is totally out of sync with African culture, which is matrilineal and matrifocal at its base. So we cannot be worshiping an all-male deity who runs a heaven with all-male angels.
Current paradigms, that the current religions, the current philosophies that we are following is not working. The Kemetians are here and they're coming back to change the philosophy. And they're coming back to bring self-love. They're coming back to heal the planet and transform the planet from where it is now. So the Kemetians are coming through with their philosophies to move us on, to show us that we can change the world. We are important, and especially in this time where these things are happening.